2023. For only the third time in 40 years, the Australian continent entered a per capita recession. The consequence was a regression in time, as Australian wages declined to levels not seen since June of 2011. Against a backdrop of devastating bushfires, a global pandemic, and punishing lockdowns, one silent pressure eclipsed them all: the simple, crushing cost of living. Over the last few decades, Australia has been the stage for one of the greatest housing booms the modern world has ever witnessed. Since 1973, house prices across its capital cities have multiplied by a staggering 36 times. Today, Sydney stands as the second most unaffordable metropolis on the planet. How did a nation of such vast, open space find itself here? This is a land of profound beauty, a continent fringed by oceans, defined by world-class beaches, vibrant cities, and sprawling parklands. It is a paradise in the global imagination, but to live in this paradise is a different story. To purchase a median home in Melbourne, a family requires an income of at least $170,000 per year. In Sydney, that figure swells to an astonishing $260,000. This, set against a median household income in both cities of just $100,000, reveals a chasm between aspiration and reality. Home ownership is now mathematically out of reach for most. This is not merely a story of Sydney and Melbourne. Since 2020, the price of a home in Brisbane, Adelaide, and Perth has surged by over 50%. In that same period, wages grew by a mere 12%. For young Australians, the consequences are acute. They have not had the luxury of riding this wave of skyrocketing values. They are left playing a perpetual game of catch-up. The result is a quiet, generational retreat. Home ownership rates for those under the age of 34 have plummeted by nearly 25%. The mania of the market was perhaps best captured by a single listing in Sydney. A home sold without a toilet, without power, without a kitchen. Yet it ignited a bidding war, ultimately selling for $3.5 million. But what of those who simply wished to rent? Here, too, the ground has shifted. In Sydney, monthly rents now exceed $3,000. Brisbane is not far behind at $2,500. Historically, rental increases were measured and predictable, but since 2020, they have exploded, climbing by over 8% each year. An entire population is caught in a vice, forced to pay 21st century prices with wages from a decade past. And this assumes a place can even be found. The demand is insatiable. Every vacant property is met with the deluge of applications, dozens, sometimes hundreds, deep. Viewings are marked by lines that snake around city blocks, a pilgrimage of the hopeful. This is not a contest for luxury or status. It is a fundamental struggle for the most basic of human needs: a place to live, a place to sleep, a place to call home. In a nation built on the promise of a fair go, the question now hangs heavy in the air. What becomes of the dream when there is no room left to dream it? An unspoken covenant, once central to the Australian identity, is beginning to fracture. The promise that hard work would secure a comfortable life is fading into a landscape of unattainable property and rising despair. For honest, striving Australians, the dream is being replaced by a quiet sense of hopelessness. And it forces a profound question. Why has the foundational pillar of shelter spun so violently out of control? In the search for a cause, one narrative has taken a powerful hold: immigration. Between the years 2022 and 2023, the nation welcomed nearly 740,000 people. It is a figure without precedent in modern Australian history. 200,000 more than the years before the global pandemic. The logic appears inescapable. When demand surges against a static supply, prices must rise. Economists and analysts agree the immediate pressure point was not the auction house, but the rental ledger. The majority of new arrivals are temporary visa holders, and of them, 70% are renters. The impact was felt most acutely in the migrant-heavy corridors of Melbourne's southeast and Sydney's inner southwest, where rents leaped by 18% in a single year. Newcomers, driven by necessity, often pool resources, sharing single dwellings among many, a strategy that inadvertently outcompetes locals and pushes rental yields to heights not witnessed in decades. But to focus solely on the newcomer is to mistake a symptom for the disease. The argument that immigration is the primary driver of soaring house prices is a fragile one. Viewed through a wider lens, Australia's migration rate over the last decade has not been an anomaly. It has tracked closely with historical averages. The crucial variable that has changed is not the number of people arriving, but the number of homes being built to receive them. While the population has steadily grown, housing construction has faltered. The nation's building industry is caught in a bind as the cost of creating a new home continues to climb. In 2023, a mere 170,000 dwellings were completed, the lowest figure in a decade. It was a moment of profound imbalance, as the largest influx of people in a generation met the shallowest pool of new housing. The origins of this crisis, however, lie deeper in the past. Since 1966, the rate of home construction relative to the population has been in a slow, inexorable decline. The year 2000 marked a precipice, a moment when building rates fell away, carving a supply deficit whose aftershocks define the market today. At the heart of this deficit lies not an economic policy, but a cultural ideal. Australia is a suburban nation, a landscape where communities have consistently chosen urban sprawl over densification. The numbers are startling. Sydney and Melbourne house roughly 2,000 people per square kilometre. Compare this to London's 6,000, Munich's 4,400, or Amsterdam's 3,600. By the standards of the world's great cities, Australia's are vast expanses of sparsely populated land. This is the consequence of a deeply held belief that the suburban environment, with its promise of space and quiet, is the ideal setting for raising a family, for building a safe community. It is an ideal underwritten by a continent of seemingly infinite land. But as the cost of that ideal climbs ever higher, a nation is forced to confront a difficult truth: that the dream of a house and a garden, once a symbol of prosperity, may now be the very architecture of its own crisis. Theoretically, the continent nation could continue to build outward, an endless suburban sprawl stretching toward the horizon. In Sydney alone, the greenfield growth areas hold the potential for 280,000 new homes. But this is a potential that exists only on paper. In reality, Australia is paralyzed by an invisible yet formidable force. Despite an extreme housing crisis, March of 2024 saw the lowest number of approvals for detached homes since 2012. These are not towering apartment blocks altering a skyline. They are the quintessential suburban dream: single-family houses on their own plots of land. Here, strong community advocacy and labyrinthine government red tape have woven a net of delay. To gain approval for a single home in New South Wales takes on average 111 days. In the suburb of Liverpool, that wait balloons to 288 days. By comparison, in the sprawling state of Texas, a similar permit can often be secured in less than a week. These protracted timelines have made it impossible for the government to meet its own targets. Australia is on track to build 40% fewer homes than required, a staggering deficit that fuels an artificial scarcity of land. And where there is scarcity, has risen at 3 times the rate of apartments. With land itself becoming a precious commodity, the cycle intensifies. It becomes ever more expensive to acquire, more challenging to develop economically. This is a landscape of scarcity, almost entirely by design, a system that benefits those who already own a piece of the dream. The impact on the next generation has been profound. Home ownership rates for young people have plummeted by 25%, while for the general population, the drop is a more modest 8%. But the gridlock on the ground is only one part of the story. Beneath the surface, a critical factor is at play, embedded not in soil, but in the tax code. During the 1930s, facing its own housing shortage, Australia introduced a policy to encourage investment in rental properties: negative gearing. The mechanism is deceptively simple. It allows an investor to offset any financial losses on a rental property directly against their personal income. If an individual earns $100,000 a year, but loses $10,000 on their rental property, they are taxed only on $90,000 of income. This idea is a global outlier. Across the entire Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, only New Zealand and Japan have comparable policies. In the 1980s, a government attempted to curb its power, imposing restrictions similar to those in the United Kingdom. The backlash was swift and decisive. Negative gearing was restored to its original form, a testament to the old adage, "You can give, but you can never take." At that very same moment in history, interest rate controls were removed, unleashing the full power of this incentive. A system designed for one crisis was now perfectly positioned to fuel another, decades later. What began as a solution has become an engine of inequality, a ghost in the machine shaping who can and who cannot call a piece of this vast land their own. A unique financial architecture was taking shape across the Australian continent, one designed to make debt a powerful and remarkably inexpensive tool for acquiring property. This gave rise to a strategy known as negative gearing, a calculated loss made attractive by tax incentives, allowing individuals to leverage debt on an unprecedented scale. But this alone was not the tipping point. The true catalyst was found within the nation's retirement accounts, the vast pools of capital known as superannuation funds. A superannuation fund, or super, carries significant tax advantages. When used to purchase real estate, taxes on rental income are slashed to just 15%. Unlike in the United States, where using a retirement account for property investment is a labyrinthine and costly affair, in Australia, it is not only simple, it is often encouraged. And the incentives did not stop there. In 1999, the Australian government ignited the fuse. Capital gains taxes on the sale of real estate were cut in half. For those holding property within a super, the effective tax rate plummeted to a mere 10%. There is almost no other country on earth that has constructed such a favorable tax regime for property investors. Australia stands alone. Yet this exceptionalism has drawn heavy criticism. The argument is that the system materially benefits existing landowners and older generations at a staggering cost to taxpayers of nearly $8 billion per year. It is an argument with considerable weight. When between 50 and 80% of all investment properties are negatively geared, a fundamental problem reveals itself. A system that actively encourages speculation on assets that lose income is not just flawed, it is a profound anomaly. This has created another deeper challenge. Australia has made it so advantageous to invest in Neuwirted from elsewhere. The nation's productivity growth has been slowing for decades. Between 2010 and 2020, the average annual labor productivity growth was only 1.1%, a shadow of previous eras. Much of this is traced back to a stark lack of innovation in sectors outside of services and mining. To put this innovation deficit in perspective, one need only look at spending on research and development. In 2022, Australia dedicated just 1.7% of its GDP to R&D. The average for developed nations is 2.4%. All invest far more. The consequences have been stark. For the last 10 years, both nominal and real GDP per capita have failed to grow. Business and job prospects are eroding, while the cost of living continues its relentless climb. The ultimate price is paid by hard-working Australians. A nation's tax code is more than a set of rules. It is a statement of its values. Through decades of policy, Australia has made its choice clear, creating a landscape where the tangible weight of brick and mortar is valued more highly than the unseen potential of a new idea. It is a decision whose true cost is only now being fully understood. In the Australian psyche, a foundational belief has taken root, that the surest path to wealth is etched not in enterprise, but in the earth itself. The ledger of the nation tells a revealing story. The earnings of its people are taxed more heavily than in all but 3 other developed economies. Its corporations face a rate 6.3% above the OECD average. When measured a half times higher, a disproportionate share of government revenue flows from the sweat of labor and the profits of industry, while a disproportionately small amount is drawn from the ever-rising value of land. The financier Charlie Munger once offered a profound insight. Show me the incentives, and I will show you the outcome. In Australia, the incentives are laid bare, a system that rewards speculation on housing while disincentivizing the hard work of building a productive business. The incentive is to hoard land. The outcome, an economic system of profound and deepening inequity. It is a crisis that defies simple blame, a problem that has festered for decades, indifferent to the colors of the party in power. The Labor government of Paul Keating presided over a modest rise in house prices, but it was a period of rapid economic growth and modernization. There was, for a time, a sense of balance. Then came the tenure of John Howard, and with it, the Great Acceleration. Under his government, the value of a home did not just rise, it more than doubled, setting a new and punishing precedent. 3 chances fell to the subsequent Labor governments, yet the relentless climb continued, paused only momentarily by the shockwaves of a global financial crisis. The coalition governments that followed, under Abbott, Turnbull, and Morrison, could not tame the beast, and as a new decade closes under Anthony Albanese, the graph continues its unforgiving upward trajectory. Consider this: a home purchased in 1992 for $500,000 would today command a price of $2.4 million. For one generation, it was the foundation of wealth. For the next, born into the shadow of this boom, it is a fortress whose gates may never open. This is a reality that runs deeper than politics. It is a structural flaw that cannot be solved by switching allegiances at the ballot box. It demands a fundamental re-examination of the very policies that fuel the fire, from tax incentives that favor property over production to the red tape that stifles new supply. The crisis is not merely one of housing, but of national identity. A country built on the promise of a fair go now confronts a system that rewards status over striving. The question is no longer who is to blame, but whether the will exists to redraw the map of incentives before the Australian dream becomes a relic, visible only in the memories of a generation that came before.